Today, I am thrilled to have William Stillman back on the show. William has been dubbed the Autism Whisperer by talk host Frankie Picasso for his innate ability to understand and interpret children and adults on the autism spectrum. Lisa Jo Rudy at About.com's autism moderator has said, William, William Stillman is one of the few who can translate the workings of the autistic mind to the neurotypical community. And another person, Kelly Jayden of Internet News Outlet, stated, William Stillman dares to go where few have gone before. Without a doubt, he is the forerunner of the beginning of a movement which will alter the development and nature of mankind. William is also a psychic and a medium and so many other things. And you can go into his bio and read about all the things that he's been involved in and all of his beautiful books. But today I really wanted to talk about your work in autism. And I have your book right here, The Soul of Autism. And I know the other one is The God Connection. And so thank you so much for coming on the show, Bill, and talking about this very important subject.
Thank you for having me, Marla. It is always a great delight and a true pleasure. And you're such a lovely gal. So I appreciate you having me back. And I agree. We want to hash this out and talk through some things about autism and maybe spirituality and how the two are oftentimes interrelated, huh?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for our first question. I know the name of the first chapter in this beautiful book, The Soul of Autism. The first chapter is The World Needs Autism. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think at the time, well, it probably still is a rather controversial way to kick off a book by saying,
I think it's
the world
beautiful.
needs autism when there have been so many stringent and valiant efforts to try to prevent autism from happening. God will always find a way to keep us humble and to slowly but surely have great influence on us. And the world needs people with differences in it to keep us focused on what's important, to humble us. Oftentimes, we're talking about folks who are the teachers and the mentors, and parents and siblings and extended family are the pupils, if we can see it that way. I've had so many people, parents over the years, I've been, in addition to being on the autism spectrum myself, I've been working in the field since 1986, 87. So it's, about 35 years. And I have had so many parents over the years tell me I am a better person, I'm a better human being for parenting a child on the autism spectrum, if you can imagine it. Now, that's not to, suggest that it's all, sweetness and light and, jumping up and down for joy, every day, because it's not at all. But it has been a learning opportunity, a learning process. People have told me, we've connected to amazing people that we wouldn't have known otherwise if it hadn't been for my son or my daughter. Sometimes families have more than one child on the autism spectrum, Yeah. And this is a community of families that have united and found a voice, and that's a good thing too. And they've been advocating on behalf of their children, their teens, their adult children, and this is important stuff,
Well, I think and you know much better than me, but with the autism rate just skyrocketing, in this world, I truly believe it's a message from the universe. It's like, what is the universe trying to tell us? And as you say, more empathy, more compassion. I actually suggest to my readers, and this will be in the show notes, There's a documentary that's out, and it's called That Which Holds. And Bill is featured in it quite a few times. And the first quote, it says, well, first of all, I want to let you know why they started. I'm sorry, wait 1 second. The documentary, and it says, this documentary has been created in the context of a pandemic when the whole of humanity has been forced to stop and reflect. This moment is an opportunity to transform old structures and thus sensitize ourselves towards empathy, the main objective of this work. I just thought that was just so beautiful. And then it does start with the quote from Gandhi: our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization. Gandhi. So what I suggest you watch this documentary, because I just watched it this morning, and it's amazing, with parents on there and experts and all of them. So let's talk a little bit. Something I was really intrigued in the book are some of the stories about, and if you don't remember specific stories, that's fine, but the spiritual, intuitive characteristics that we can talk about children, but that these children exhibit.
Yeah. Well, for them, and, I've known these folks intimately for years now. I used to kind of facilitate a meeting group for a long time of folks who didn't speak but would have keyboards or other devices to communicate. And for them, everything that fascinates us with regard to the spiritual, it's normal, not paranormal for them.
Right.
It's natural, not supernatural for them. So much of it, Marla, comes of, and I want to be really clear to our listeners and our viewers that I'm not talking about all people on the autism spectrum. I don't presume to represent all people. And I've had some people on the autism spectrum like really call me out for that too, when I've been really careful about not intending to speak on behalf of all people with autism. But in my opinion, and based on my personal experience and observations, people on the autism spectrum, especially those people who appear to be, significantly impaired and aren't wired for speech, they are the most likely to be predisposed to naturally accessing what we would think of as spiritual gifts and talents.
Yes.
Because they live in silence. They were born into silence. And so, but with an intellect that's intact. And that is so important to understand. And so who else spends that kind of, absorbing amount of time in thought? Well, I think of, the nun, the monk, the yogi, the guru, the rabbi, people who deliberately, consciously devote time to prayer and meditation with the object of strengthening their connection to the source of our creation.
Yes.
Well, those people at some point made a decision to enter into that way of life. The folks of whom I am speaking were born into it. So it comes to them completely naturally. And so for them, it's not telepathy, it's communication. To them, it's not, clairvoyance. It's just, this natural day-to-day ability to have, precognition for things. And for them, because it's so normal, it's almost average, they don't really give it a second thought, to be honest. And for a lot of the folks whom I was with whom I was friends and for whom I've, facilitated interactions and so on, it's not their priority. Their priority is really advocacy, civil rights issues,
Right.
championing, uh, educational needs and higher education and so on. Yeah. So for them, it's all just kind of a natural byproduct of this kind of heightened sensitivity. You also have to remember people with autism, and it's one of the criteria for being diagnosed as autism, is a hypersensitivity to external stimuli that would be assaultive to the senses. So we're talking about folks that are, buzzing and vibrating at a frequency higher than the typical person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, it makes sense. I mean, if you understand
right
spirituality and spiritual giftedness, it kind of makes sense that they would be among the people predisposed to tapping into all of that very naturally.
Yeah. Bill, did you did you have invisible friends and see angels or those sorts of things when
No,
you were a kid?
no, but well, you and I have chatted previously
Yes,
about
your childhood.
I had some rather nasty things try to get a hold of me
Right.
instead. And that has also happened to a number of my friends with autism as well. There's always going to be some of that negative energy that's going to want to take you down and cause you to become undone and prevent you from manifesting all that you can be.
Right.
But that's true of everybody.
Yeah. And what do you suggest well, we're kind of getting off the subject now, but
Yeah.
yeah. So, but there are ways to combat that and go towards the positive. And I'm sure you have some of that
Yeah.
in your book too. Yeah.
Just prayer.
Prayer.
Nothing. People always say to me, well, should I buy crystals? Should I use holy water? Should I sage?
Right.
And I always tell people, I'm never going to discourage that, but bottom line is nothing trumps the power of prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I have a little story here about a 3-year-old who had autism that was in your book. Lisa's son, Taylor. I don't know if you remember this, but from the time he was a baby, he would look to a spot in the air and laugh. Later, at about 3 years old, he started talking about Jesus. We never even went to church. He was never around talk of Jesus or God. He would talk with Jesus and see angels all the time. He's now age 9, but just last summer he asked, "Do you really not see the angels?" Last year he told me how sad he was for me that I never saw Jesus or talked to him. He lays his hand on us when we are hurt and he prays for us. The little boy has blown his mother away, and she keeps thinking, if he doesn't talk to Jesus, how does he know these things? Once, when I was stressed, he put his palm on my cheek and said, "Shh, be quiet. Let Jesus fill the air." I just thought that was so sweet.
Isn't that stunning?
It's so amazing. And then it goes on to talk about the connection with animals too. Mm-hmm. And how, there's really this special connection with animals. So parents who are living with an autistic child, what do you suggest to them, as someone who lives with autism yourself? You suggest to them to celebrate their child, of course, which they all do, but other little messages to celebrate these beautiful beings.
Just pay attention. Pay attention. It's very important. My motto has always been presume intellect.
Yes.
So don't allow anyone to tell you that your child is defined by an IQ score, because use that to get you what you need, but then disregard it entirely, because
yes.
it's not the truth of the emotional and the spiritual intelligence of the individual within. But pay attention, be very careful of not bombarding someone with therapies, and be very careful about not sending the message that you're broken and you are in dire need of repair. Right. So any kind of education, any kind of therapy should always, in my opinion, should always be done naturally within the flow of typical daily events and routines, so that it is invisible. So that it is invisible and that it's part of what the family would already be doing anyways. There's lots of ways to do that. And also make sure that you sing everything.
Sing?
make music part of everything. Yes, because I have known people, it's very much like folks with dementia and Alzheimer's. I've known people with autism who couldn't speak a word but could sing beautifully. And that's a way in.
Yeah,
you know
that's really beautiful. I would think that not many know that. My kids went to the Waldorf school,
hmm
and the teachers in like pre-K and kindergarten, they would, whenever they wanted them like to do something, they would sing it to them. And it was so sweet, and boy did the children really really listen to that. And just like what we're talking about right now in the autism scale, young children, they vibrate at a higher level, a different frequency. So how the singing can really help that. So how do you bring music into your life?
I sing a lot.
Nice, nice.
I sing a lot. I'm all for singing because I think even if you're not very good at it, it's a cathartic release oftentimes,
Absolutely.
and to sing at the top of your lungs, to sing in the shower,
Yeah,
you know.
definitely.
But where I don't think that's exclusive to kids with autism. I think
Right.
it's it pretty much sums up just children in general. They're much closer and much more familiar with having been a soul than they are being in human form. And so I think probably music is more familiar to them because it's the language of spirit, it's the language of soul, and it's a universal language. You don't have to know words. You just vibrate with the emotion and the energy of the notes.
Is that one reason you think that these children also connect with animals so well? Because I know, when I watch my two animals at night, labradoodles, they my daughter and I are just amazed because we can just tell that they're seeing spirit. They'll just look around, and they just kind of are, because obviously they're operating at a higher frequency or a different frequency than we are. So is that the reason that you think that happens also?
Well, the animals live in silence too, for the most part.
Yes,
So they're
yes.
also engaged in this sort of perpetual meditation, and they are also plugged in to a direct line of communication in the way that someone who doesn't speak is as well.
Yeah.
So I often think that even when animals are suffering or they're in very distressing situations, I have to believe that there is some force there communicating to them, talking them through it, trying to calm them and soothe them and so on.
Right. Oh, I love that. So part of in your book, you state, and I've heard others actually say this, that some believe that in a few decades, if not sooner, there'll be more autistic people than non-autistic. And you mentioned the Bible beatitude. Is that how you
The,
say that word?
the attitude, the meek shall inherit the earth. Yeah.
Yes, blessed are the
Yeah.
meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Yeah,
Can you just
interesting.
share
Well, I
your
think that's
thoughts?
I think that's been circumvented a little bit because I believe it was in 2012 that the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, which autism is not a mental illness, but it's
Right.
included in there. Well, it was revised. And so it did away with all of these subcategories of autism that had been included at one point in time. And so it did away with Asperger's syndrome as a diagnosis, believe it or not. It did
Interesting.
away with childhood disintegrative disorder. It did away with pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. It did away with Rett syndrome. And so everything is now just called autism disorder. And I really don't care for the word disorder, to be
Yes.
honest with you, but because it, you know, immediately connotes that something is terribly wrong.
Right.
And it's kind of offensive, but it's a clinical term, you know. But and so I'm wondering if that wasn't a political move
Right.
in order to prevent insurance companies from hemorrhaging, in order to curtail the perception that there is an epidemic of autism, you know. Because I haven't been, honestly, I haven't been involved in that whole realm for some time now. I've kind of segued into other things. So I haven't been keeping current with the statistics around the incidence of autism, but I would be willing to bet that it's leveled out as a result of that.
Interesting.
And so if it had not been changed, and there were other ways in which you were eligible to be autism adjacent, I'm wondering if we wouldn't still be seeing those statistics increasing.
Right. Right. Well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Yeah. So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how have you seen, specifically with the children, how have you seen these kids transform families, friendships, lives? And what do you feel are the greatest lessons we can learn from those living with autism?
Hmm. Well, again, I think the lessons to be learned are certainly for, parents, grandparents, siblings, um, educators, members of the community, just, patience, compassion, advocacy, enhanced awareness.
Mm.
Yeah. But we're always up against those people that are the opposite of all of that, that have no patience, that are of the opinion that these are people that should not be participants in society, and so on. And so again, there's always that danger of the pendulum swinging backwards, and I'm concerned that we're coming dangerously close to that
Ah.
politically
So,
speaking. I'm sorry, I don't recall the first portion of the question.
oh, just children transforming families and friendships
Transforming
and
families.
lives.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, the books are full of those types of stories. And as you may
Right.
know, I've done, I think, 10 special needs parenting books now. So the three spiritual books are only uh, a small piece of all of that.
Right.
So, yeah, people, we need to be able to create opportunities, um, educational, vocational, romantic opportunities for
Hmm.
people with different ways of being in the world, you know?
Absolutely. And it just brings, I know I have a nephew, as you know, that is has special needs, and it just brings so much compassion and empathy and love, pure, authentic, sacred love into the family. Talk about in the book spiritual reserve and the divine byway, and I can grab the information from the book if you'd like for me to, because you give 8 practices that you talk about in your book with kids. And this is really for everyone. But what do you mean when you talk about spiritual reserve?
When I talk about spiritual reserve, what I'm talking about is just a heightened awareness and an expanded consciousness, Marla. It's not rocket science. It's just a matter of being aware, being awake and aware, paying attention to what is going on around you. Too many people have their faces in with their wrist in the air and their faces in a cell phone screen, and they are missing everything that's going on around them. And so the spiritual reserve is, paying attention to the blossom on a bush that you're passing, paying attention to the snow that's falling outside, or the singing of the birds, or the gorgeous, coral colored sunset, paying attention to those things and acknowledging them, expressing gratitude for them. And the more you're doing that, the more you are contributing to, in my opinion, this spiritual reserve that you have
Yes.
within yourself. It's like making deposits into the bank. And then when you need to make a withdrawal, there's enough there to draw from without, hemorrhaging all of the reserve, withdraw little bits at a time when you need to be resilient, when you need to be strong, when you need to be advocating on behalf of yourself or others. That's what I meant by spiritual reserve.
And just a quote, another quote from your book, C.S. Lewis, in terms of talking about the spiritual reserve, but this was in Chronicles of Narnia. And this is after you've done one of those things that you just mentioned, or you lived, that's the way you live. And the memory of that moment stayed with them always. So as long as they both lived, if ever they were sad or afraid or angry, the thought of all that glorious goodness and the feeling that it was still there, quite close, would come back and make them stop, or make them sure deep down inside that all was well. I just thought that
And,
said so much.
I was actually thinking about that concept this morning. I have had such a ridiculously blessed and outrageously privileged life in so many ways. I feel guilty about it at times because, I really went through a very protracted, very difficult years in my youth. But that's behind me now, and things keep growing and getting bigger and better. And I, don't always feel worthy of it. So I just stop to think, if something should happen to me, if I should become ill, if I should become incapacitated, if I should have to leave my home or something, I can't complain. I have nothing to complain about because I have had such an amazing, beautiful life in this lifetime, in this existence. I can't complain about a thing.
Which is so beautiful to hear you say, because you did have a really tough childhood. I mean, a lot to get over, I guess.
I almost took my life,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And that
Yeah,
you've
it was
come
tough.
this far and giving so much back to the world.
But when I think about who I am, and that would probably make sense to me from a soul perspective, because I always like to get the hard part out of the way. I'm always the person that wants the bad news first, and then I want the good news. So I figure, well, I probably signed up to, like, let's get the hard stuff out of the way, and then,
Yeah.
maybe we'll coast for the rest of the time.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. So, well, that's an interesting question. Speaking of that, with your incredible mediumship and psychic abilities, I've had a few readings from you. Could you just please comment on your thoughts or what you've learned from the spirit world about planning our lives before we come to this earthly realm, and why you feel that some do plan a life with certain disabilities and those sorts of things?
I believe that the most advanced of souls are those who elect to be born into the most challenging of circumstances.
Mhm.
And so I am always extremely skeptical of people who make a point of publicly stating that they are a very old and wise soul, because I think that those are the people who are actually very new souls.
Yes.
And oftentimes, those very old souls aren't intended to be here very long in human form, also. So, oftentimes, as you know, they are teachers, and they are here to teach not only by virtue of their personalities and their passions and their interests and their connections to family members, but they are here to teach as a result of their absence as well. And I think that is such a noble aspiration to sign up for. And I've known people that have lost their children, and I know that this resonates with you as well. And it's, you know, very much a process, very much a learning process. But I have connected to souls of those individuals. They consistently say, "Well, I wasn't supposed to be here that long to begin with," and oftentimes parents will say to me, "Oh my gosh, she had been saying that to me since she was a little girl." You know,
Right.
that you know, you would say, "Well, don't you want to tell your children about this someday?" And the child would say, I'm not gonna live to be a mother," you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So it's so fascinating that at some level it's already sort of ingrained in the human consciousness that I'm here to fulfill a mission. I'm on a have a purpose to fulfill, and then through whatever means they exit. You know,
Right.
so
Right.
that's an old soul.
Yes.
That's an old soul, or an older or a more evolved soul that is willing to make that kind of sacrifice.
Mm, that makes so much sense. So, in your book, you talk a little bit about for the listeners, Bill and I are both, he hasn't read the book for a while, so I'm flipping through some pages.
I
But
do want to, it did win a National Book Award,
I know
actually.
it
That one
did.
did. So I'm very pleased about that because, you know, it's kind of far out concepts, you know, maybe not so much in this day and age, but when
Right.
those books first started coming out, you know, 15 years ago, I had people tell me, "I was so worried about you sabotaging your own career in this field."
But then the information just exploded. I mean, everybody came out with their own stories, and wow, you've been such a pioneer in this, and so many other things. But speaking of a divine byway, when you talk about the different things that people can do, um, you said it was necessary for me to create my own divine byway to attain authenticity and harvest the spiritual reserve to which I was entitled. For those readers feeling directionless and need of a compass or roadmap, you've laid out a few things to help them. So would you like me to review these, or
Would you
I know, yeah, of
refresh my
course,
memory?
I will refresh.
Probably the first one has something to do with committing to a higher power.
Yes, that's
I'm thinking,
exactly it.
yeah,
Committing to a higher power. And you just jump in if you'd like to
I
elaborate.
shall. Thank you.
Yes, daily prayer or meditation. And you,
I tell people, you know, do you have 5 minutes a day to
yeah,
spare for God? Do you have 5 minutes for
right.
God? And they better say yes. And you know, I don't care. I don't care if you call it God. I don't. You know, a lot of people don't use the word God.
Right.
People, they universe, higher power, source, Wonder Woman. I don't care what you call it, but you have to. You're Wonder Woman, Marla. But you have to, in my opinion, you have to acknowledge, if you are building that spiritual reserve in the way that we discussed, you have to acknowledge that all of this that we're taking in around us, all we survey, it's not an accident.
Yes.
You know, it's not a happy coincidence. It's all by divine design. It was placed here deliberately. It's so fascinating to me that everything in nature, every creature, it all serves a purpose.
Yes.
You know, there's nothing on this earth that doesn't serve some sort of purpose,
It's not random.
somehow, some way. And so we as human beings are not an accident. The human body, when it works, it's just absolutely extraordinary, amazing. It's like this, self-sustaining robot that doesn't need to be plugged in or charged or anything. It just, not in a mechanical way, certainly, but we can plug in by establishing or strengthening or rediscovering that relationship with God. And again, as we were just discussing, expressing gratitude every day for all the gifts and blessings that we do have. So when things do go wrong, or there's an accident or a crisis of some sort, we are in a better position to sort of roll with it and go with the flow and still try to find a way to see the glass as half full.
Yeah, it's so true. When something very painful, you go through that, but just remembering all the beautiful things that you do have to be grateful, which goes along with something I think is so important: random acts of kindness and holistic health. We've talked about that a little bit already. Reverence for nature, and I'm such a big one on this for children. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Could I back up just a moment? The
Absolutely.
random acts of kindness could be as simple as seeing someone walking down the sidewalk as you're driving past them, and this person looks like they're having a really tough time. Or maybe they look appearance wise like they've had a rough life. And a random act of kindness could simply be sending them good thoughts as you're driving past them. I try to do that, and I'll say, God, please do something to lighten that person's load today. Please bring them a moment of humor and relief, So it doesn't have to be that you are, exhausting yourself, donating all kinds of time and resources to a charity. It's much simpler than that.
Yes, sending them that beautiful positive energy. That's so important for people to hear that, because many think it has to be such a huge act when it doesn't. But to go through the rest, well, we did a little bit of reverence of nature. I'll just read the rest of them. Visualize prosperity, acknowledge your spirit guides, mentors, and protectors. Yes. And so those are them. So do you have any comments on the rest of those? All of them so important.
Yeah, I it's pretty far out that I mentioned spirit guides in a book about autism.
I love that. You knew what you'd be doing in the future.
Yeah, I guess so.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, there's a difference between a spirit guide and what I call a guardian. So when I think of a spirit guide, I think of a relationship that was established in the heavenly realm or our true spiritual home prior to incarnating. So it was sort of a pact or an agreement that was made. I think of the spirit guide like Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio, sort of like this little glorified conscience that's in the background, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, trying to keep us on the straight and narrow path and distract our attention to people, places, and things that serve our greater good. Also to serve as a muse, to impress us with creative inspiration.
Yes.
So a guide is not someone that has been known to us in this lifetime, but a guardian could be someone that we have known in this lifetime and who could sometimes function in the way of a guide. But a guide, I believe, is accessible to us 24/7 in the way that God is. I believe guardians, or the soul energies of people that we have known and loved, are but also have their own things that they need to be doing. So they will, pass through from time to time, right, or in moments of great desolation and sadness, or in moments of crisis, may come in to offer us some sign or symbol or communication or dream of comfort. Nice. So in my way of thinking, that's the distinction.
Right. And just trusting that. And like you said, bringing that in and
Right. And
knowing.
there's a misconception there too. People will say, well, why isn't my guide doing this or that? And I said, well, you have to extend the invitation. you know,
Right.
unless it's a situation where, it's, becoming precarious or bordering on emergency, they have a hands-off policy.
Right.
They're not going to
Interesting.
interfere with free will.
Yes. Yes. Well, what's so beautiful about all of this too is your knowledge from all of your amazing mediumship and psychic abilities too, the that you're so in tune with all of this, and can be able to answer and impart this knowledge.
Well, Marla, everything that I know, I've learned from other people's deceased loved ones.
I love
Like
it.
that's how I know what goes on over there.
Right,
It's been
right.
the consistency with which they've been communicating all of these things.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
And I believe that I've only been able to tap into the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
I know there's much more beyond what I've been able to perceive or what they are willing to tell me, because there have been occasions when people's dearly departed have said, well, I can't tell you more than that right now,
Yes,
or
yes. That has happened to me.
I'll hit a firewall or something like that.
Right.
So there's some really big, and that's probably, I'm sure that's by design, because our little human minds probably we couldn't wrap our heads around it.
Right. And I encourage my listeners to go back and listen to William's two or three other interviews I've done when we're talking more about your psychic abilities.
Yeah.
And I have an apology. I think I called you Bill sometime throughout this interview, and
that's fine.
I know that you prefer William. So
That's fine.
we need to wrap it up. I do love one of the quotes that was in the documentary, That Which Holds. Please watch it. And the quote is, "Beware, so long as you live, of judging people by appearances." Jean de La Fontaine. And I just love that quote. So,
I
William,
want to, yeah, Marla, I also want to just affirm that I was very pleasantly pleased and delighted by that documentary also. And I don't think it's very long. I don't
no, it's
recall.
like 50 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's so brilliant and just
Oh,
beautifully done, and just lovely.
yeah.
And I believe that they do touch upon the spiritual connection in the
Right.
documentary, which
They
is kind of,
do.
a
They
bold
do.
move.
And
Yeah.
I wouldn't have found it except I went on your website and I did, and this has got to get out there. Maybe it was just me that I haven't found it, but it's absolutely so important, such important information for everyone. So, William, I know that once again, we got to wrap it up, but your life is like crazy with beautiful things now and what's going on. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now? What takes up so much of your
Oh my
a lot of your
goodness. Well,
time?
I'm doing very little in the field with autism anymore, but
Yes.
I still have my big toe in the pool. So I'm still connected, and I'm still doing a little bit of consulting work there. But I've become so immersed in the mediumship and the spirituality, and I find it so fascinating myself. I have a book that came out just a couple of months ago called The Practicing Psychic, and it is a Hippocratic Oath code of ethics handbook for people who are just starting to maybe get into this line of work, or are thinking that they have what it takes to get in. It's not a how-to book in terms of your psychic development. It's again sort of a nuts and bolts of the business aspect of it, but also again some very profound tenets by which to hold yourself and your standards accountable.
Yes.
So there's that, and just have been busy with events and private sessions and so on. And I couldn't be more delighted. I love my life. I am blessed and privileged. And thank you, dear lady, for having me back on your program.
You are so welcome. And you, I would love for you to come back and talk about your new book at some point, but give you a bit of a breather. So if people want to find you, how do they do that?
They can find me at williamstillman.com. William Stillman Psychic Medium is my Facebook page. I also have a YouTube channel called William Stillman, and maybe someday we'll do a show about all of my treks to the Gettysburg battlefield. And there's a bunch of videos where I'm out there with various historians, and they're verifying what I'm picking up. So that's kind of intriguing.
It's so intriguing. You actually sent me a few of those, and I
Did
watched
I?
all of them. Yes, and
Yeah.
they're so fascinating. So that would be great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to add that I haven't asked you today?
I would like to let our listeners know, in keeping with the concept of the spiritual reserve of which we were speaking earlier, I just want to tell people to always have faith in your faith. Have faith in your faith. There are people that I have told, this, you don't need me. You don't need me to connect to your loved ones in spirit. Just have faith in your faith. Recall a happy memory. Hold an object that belonged to them if you need to, and just be still, be quiet, and see what comes.
Thank you. Beautiful. Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much. And you have a great rest of the day, and you take good care of yourself.
Thank you, Marla. You do the same. It's always a great pleasure. You're a lovely lady.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye now.